Welcome to Battle Proven Leadership. My guest today is Marc Polymeropoulos. Marc is a retired senior intelligence officer for CIA who spent 26 years working in field operations and leadership roles. Marc is one of the intelligence community's most decorated officers and the author of Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA. His book is a fantastic journey through the lessons he learned while working in the most dangerous theaters in the world. I'm excited to have Marc on because of his real-world experience leading people in high-risk clandestine operations, which is directly on point to the mission of battle-proven leadership. My name is John Becker, host of the Debrief podcast and the founder of Aardvark Tactical. This is a new short-form podcast series from the Debrief. In each episode, we will discuss a single aspect of leadership in depth with subject matter experts who operate in high-stress environments inside and outside of the tactical community. The goal of this series is to give you direct access to the men and women whose leadership skills have been tested in the world's most dangerous situations and to provide you with specific, actionable information that you can use to hone your leadership skills. This is Battle Proven Leadership. Marc, thanks so much for being here today, man. I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thanks, John. Awesome to be here.
So, obviously, I talked about in the intro your background, which is amazing, and we certainly appreciate your silent service to our country. I think it's very easy to forget that guys like you are, spending 26 years in the shadows and not probably getting very many thank yous. So, thank you for the time you spent serving our country.
No, thanks, John. I appreciate it. It's always weird to hear that. CIA officers are different because, obviously we're undercover, and so you're not wearing a uniform. People can't come up to you. And I always joke around as I live in the DC area and in Northern Virginia, where everyone probably half the customers at your local Giant or Safeway are working at the agency. They just look like everybody else.
Yeah.
So you can never tell who they are.
Yeah. I'm always cognizant of that when I'm walking around in DC or Vienna or, Sterling, Virginia or Crystal City. You're like, yeah, all these guys are probably spies. So.
The best part about it is you go to when your kids have a baseball or football or soccer game and people are wearing a U.S. Embassy Baghdad t-shirt. And then you're like, all right. And they said, we work for the State Department. You're like, yeah, you do.
Sure,
okay.
You do. Yeah. So Marc, your book is all about leading in what you describe as the gray, right? The world of ambiguity, which is obviously where you lived for a long time. Big picture, kind of give me how did your work at CIA kind of give birth to the book Clarity in Crisis?
Well, that's a great question, and a lot of it had to do with kind of, and so much of the book has to do with kind of my humility. But the book was born. It really started in 2011 and 2012 when I spent a year in Afghanistan as a base chief. We had a paramilitary base called Shkin in eastern Afghanistan, Paktika province, and I remember flying in middle of the night, infill because we're getting rocketed all the time. Helicopters stops in a mountain pass because the base is taking, IDF incoming fire. I land. A good buddy of mine was the base chief. He sees me. My eyes are bugged out, and all I could think of was like, "Holy shit! How am I going to lead here? These 15 men and women for a year." And during that year, I learned so much about myself through trial and error. And so that's kind of when I started thinking that I got to write a book about leadership under fire, about being comfortable in the uncomfortable. I can use 100 different cliches here. But it's just the idea of when there's a lack of situational awareness, how do you respond? And can you do things that train yourself over time to be able to respond in those situations? And through a lot of trial and error, and I tell you, again, I'm a pretty humble guy because I screwed up as much as I succeeded. But I came up with a bunch of principles that I really think apply not only to kind of, our world of intelligence, special operations, or law enforcement, but really to the general public. So it's been a lot of fun doing this.
It's funny you say that because it is, and your book talks about it, but humility is kind of if you're a good leader, you're a humble leader. And right. Generally speaking, you're a humble leader because you screwed a lot of stuff up. And now 38 years into my job, I still recognize that every day I learn something new, and every day I'm a better leader than I was the day before, which makes me wonder what I was like 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the funny thing at the agency, right before I left, you can go back and you can read. It's called cable traffic. So, whether it's an operation, something that happened, an event, there was a write-up of it that you generally did. And if when I would go back and read times of something I wrote up when I was a junior manager as compared to when I finally retired, when I had a whole bunch of people working for me, but holy crap. That was an absolute textbook kind of evolution and really bad leadership when I first started to probably when I left was when I was at my finest. Unfortunately, that's kind of true. One of the reasons why I wrote the book too, but yeah, your kind of evolution, your journey as a leader is pretty extraordinary. There's no such thing as people being born as a leader. Yeah. I mean, it's really something that's learned. And anybody, certainly can turn into a great leader as well. But yeah, so looking back, there were some tough cables that I read, and I was like, can someone please delete this from the system? That never happened. I never wrote this. The other one quick thing on that, John, because at the end of my career, when I'd write something up, I wouldn't have a word, a letter in the cable at the end, and that was the letter. It was I. But in the beginning, it was always I did this, I did that. Well, at the end, no, it was the team, the station, the base. That kind of sums up so much of my journey.
Yeah, one of the things that when I teach culture-centric leadership, one of the things that I talk about is you internalize failure and you socialize positive experiences. So the team does well. I screwed this up. And it's, I think as a young leader, you're very inclined to do the exact opposite. Look for somebody to blame the mistakes on and take credit for the stuff you did right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Your book lays out 9 leadership principles. And if you don't mind, I'd like to drill down on a couple of them.
Sure.
The first thing which you kind of touched on is failure. So you describe failure as the PED for success.
Right. So when I give this talk to, I do a lot of stuff with athletic teams, mostly with college baseball teams. I got to make it out to California. It would be a lot of fun. But when I say adversity is the performance enhancing drug to success, I got to then say, okay, I'm not advocating taking PADs. That would kind of lapse after that. So no, I mean, but adversity is everything. I mean, that's the idea of that's your super fuel. Every great team that I was on. This applies to me as an individual, but also, as a leader in teams that I were part of. Something bad had happened, and that ends up being your super fuel on how you grow. And it sounds crazy to think about this. You don't ever wish bad things to happen, but in my old world of kind of intelligence and special operations, these things certainly do occur, and it's how you react to that, from that, how you grow from that. And I always, when I talk to sports teams, I said, all right, what happened to Michael Jordan his sophomore year in high school? And everyone knows the answer. What was it? He was cut. Did he take a knee? Did he go home? No. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps and off you go. And so that idea of adversity to me is absolutely critical. And it's not fun. And I certainly have some stories I could tell if you're interested in that.
Always interested in stories.
Yeah. So I think a couple key moments of my career, and again, so much of my career was based on doing some really incredible things for the U.S. government teams I was on, and then some tragedies. But it was in Eastern Afghanistan, December 30th, 2009. There were 7 of our officers in Coast paramilitary base who were killed by a suicide bomber, and it was an operation that I was a part of. In the management chain, and I bear some responsibility, and to this day I think about it all the time for some of the decisions that were made, and I will never forgive myself for a lot of what occurred, and so kind of take that extraordinary event, and I remember maybe a year and a half, 2 years after that, I came home to my wife. And I said, look, and I was on a Middle Eastern posting. We were coming back, and I said, I got to go back. She said, where? I said, I got to go back to Afghanistan. I'd been there earlier in early 2002. And she said, why? And I said, well, there's unfinished business. And so she asked me, where are you going to go? And I said, it's a small little base. It's called Shgen, which actually it's a base, a couple hours away from Coast. And so she, of course, looked it up, and I Googled it, and Time Magazine said, this is the most dangerous place on earth. So, and so she's like, oh, Christ. But anyway, so off I go there, and the reason why I tell this is so the lessons I learned from what happened, and I took, and I can't really get into detail of it, but what I took from that time in Coast and some of the decisions I made. So later on, there I am in Afghanistan again. And, there was I got to be careful on how I say this. There's obviously, we have a high value target list for us and our U.S. military, colleagues to remove from the battlefield. And there was one individual on that who was responsible for the death of 2 CIA officers. Not those who died in Coast, but those who had died still in Paktika province a couple of years earlier. And, as opposed to what I was involved with in some of my actions in Coast, I was much more patient and deliberate, much more careful. And, over time we kind of developed, the operational picture. We recruited some sources, some agents, who then put this high value target on the X, and he was removed from the battlefield. And I remember, that night we're sitting around the campfire. It's in Afghanistan. If you were there, the fire pit. We called it, caveman TV, because that's all we did. And we grabbed a Thrive phone and we called the widow of one of our officers who was living in Fort Bragg, and we told her that we had avenged the death of her husband. And I remember that feeling. I said, there's no way we would have been successful in that operation several years later in Afghanistan if not for this kind of calamity that I was involved with earlier, several years prior to that. So it's just that idea of learning from kind of these tragic, mistakes, and I guess it's the notion that you really can't succeed without having gone through this. That's a hard concept to grasp. But again, if you're in our world, I don't care if you're in special operations, if you're a cop, if you're an ER doctor, an ER nurse, there are a lot of bad things that are going to happen. And so it's how you learn from that that's actually going to define you. And so that's why this principle to me is really important. And it seems to, it resonates with a lot of people too, because if I go talk, I do a lot of work with the Philly Police Department. So I go to, Philadelphia is going through extraordinary bouts of violence, of gun violence. There was, riots on the streets. The police were attacked several years ago. And so, you don't talk to any cops who don't know about adversity.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to allow adversity to take us down.
Right.
And I think that one of the characteristics of good leaders is not only capturing lessons learned from failure, but using failure as a pivot point to allow us to move past and to move up from here, right? Like I tell the story of when I was learning to drive race cars. I had this great morning where I had, went out with my coach. I didn't spin the car once. I'm feeling fantastic. We sit down to debrief at lunch. He's like, "What do you think?" I said, "Freaking awesome, man. I had no problems. Didn't spin a car." He goes, "That's because you're slow." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he's like, "You're in control because you're slow. By definition, right. You should be marginally out of control the whole time. So if you want to be fast, you got to let go and realize that you're going to make mistakes, then learn from those mistakes." And I think it's true, certainly in running a business and certainly, in your prior line of work, mistakes are unavoidable. It's what you do with the mistakes, I think, that is the key question.
Absolutely. I would even go further and say that's what's going to define you as a leader, as a person, as a human, is how you overcome adversity. It's coming. Oh, yeah. I hate to say it, but, and especially when I talk to kind of the young, college athletes too, a lot of them who've had, these charmed lives. I said, something bad's going to happen. I hate, whether it's your, hopefully it's just athletics, but maybe your personal life. When I talk to businesses, same thing. I remember I was talking to a healthcare professional once, and he had read the book. He was the CEO of a healthcare company, and he said, he goes, this actually, these principles work because businesses go under. So what do you do then? Do you just kind of turtle up in the fetal position and cry about it? No. And even I think about my son, who's a college baseball player. He's had 2 surgeries on his shoulder, and that sucks. And he's missed, and plus with COVID, that's 3 years of the last 4 or 5 years of playing baseball. But I say to him, all right, I'll sit here, can shed a tear for about 5 minutes, and then what are you going to do about it? Right now, this is, you have the option, quit or get back at it. You got a lot of PT, you got rehab to do. You love baseball, keep playing, but you can't. No one. By the way, no one's feeling. The other thing too is it's also what I try to teach people is no one feels sorry for you.
Yeah.
No one cares.
Yeah, it's true.
So you can sit there, their tears, cry those crocodiles, but or pick yourself up because nobody feels sorry for you.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's a little tough love that helps.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. You also in the book talk about which I had never really heard it described this way, but I love the example that you gave, which is the process monkey.
Yeah.
And the importance of understanding and applying process where applicable. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so that word, of course, is like someone says the word process, everyone freaks out. So, oh my God, you're not letting me be creative. I can't. We can't brainstorm. I said, no, none of that. The notion is when the shit hits the fan, and again, you lose situational awareness. When everything is kind of cloudy around you, or you're in that gray, are there 2 or 3 things? This is the process that you can fall back on that are foundational to what you do. And so that's kind of the notion. And to me, that's it's the idea of there are some things where you can't take some things you can't take shortcuts. And so I think about in my old world, something we did was called a surveillance detection route. If you're going to meet an asset, an agent, a Russian, a Russian intelligence officer, an Iranian, nuclear official who's spying for us, we have to do something called a surveillance detection route. That means, and most of your audience is going to understand this. Those who don't, that means, obviously I'm not driving to a clandestine meeting site. It means I have to, drive around for maybe several hours. I have to get into disguise, get dumped out of the back of a car. But there's a process of ensuring that nobody is following me. We call it getting in the black. So we're free of surveillance. That's just foundational, because at the end of the day, I am kind of morally and ethically beholden to taking care of that agent. I cannot let them get killed. And so the interesting thing about this, a surveillance detection route, is you do it on your own. No one's there with you. So I have timing stops along the way, timing hacks. So I'm doing things to make sure no one's following me. But you know what? If I'm late for the meeting, I could cut corners. Nobody would know, except, of course, if the asset gets killed and I drag surveillance with me. And so, I tell the story about a time when I was in North Africa. It's funny. So I'll give your audience a hint. And the agency is pretty strict. They said, well, you can't tell anyone in your talks where you served. So then I put a picture up of the pyramids. Seems to have gotten by the censors. And so, so I was going to an agent meeting, CIA headquarters, State Department. I think it was a penetration of, I can't even remember which government, which is good. I'm getting so old, I can't even accidentally spill secrets. But we're getting the talking points for which that country's foreign minister was going to talk to our Secretary of State. So CIA headquarters wanted it, DC wanted it, State Department wanted it really badly. And I go and I get caught in what? I get caught in traffic in this North African country where there's a lot of pyramids. And so, and that's totally normal, and I'm missing the timing hacks. So I have to do something that's called aborting the meeting. I could not go to the meeting. I could not safely meet the asset. I come back to the station chief. He's like, hey man, they're going crazy back in DC. Start writing. I hope you got some good shit. And I was like, couldn't make the meeting. I said, I got jammed up in traffic. It's on me. Maybe I didn't case the site right. But I couldn't make the meeting. We have a fallback. I'll meet him tomorrow night, or it was the night after, or whatever. And the station chief did the right thing, and he said, okay, got it. And I didn't go. And so that's the idea of having these kind of key processes. I always joke around that, espionage is it's the second oldest profession. And then I always ask someone, what's the oldest?
Yeah, I think we all know what the oldest one is. Yeah.
But think about, so when I sit around, I go to a JSOC unit, a special operations unit, and I'll say, if it's from, our friends down in Coronado or Virginia Beach, say, what are the 2 things you guys got to do? And they'll say, we got to shoot and swim. Got it. So, it's intuitive, but it's the idea of when I then go talk to, other kinds of creeps, when the crap hits the fan, what are the 2 or 3 things you and your team have to be able to do? And to me, that's been really effective. And so then process ends up not being a bad word. It's something that you can fall back on.
Yeah, it's interesting because I interviewed Bob Kuntz, who's a nuclear submarine commander. And one of the things Bob talked about was how reliant they are on process, and then how they teach you to absolutely follow the process to the letter of the law and then question everything that happens, including the process. And initially you're like, oh, okay, so just ignore the process. No, you have to follow the process. You're going to kill everybody on board. And so it is this reliance on structure. It has to be there.
It does. And so let me tell you. So with that, because you to questioning the process, that's perfect, because after this incident I'm talking about, so we sat around the station. We're like, all right, we're getting killed by traffic in this country. Like, we can't make our timing hacks. We're missing agent meetings. And someone said, why don't we get a bicycle or a motorcycle? We can weave our way around traffic. And everyone's like, holy crap. That was it. Great little brainstorming. The process is still intact. It's sacrosanct. We're gonna make sure that we are not surveillance. We're not taking surveillance to an agent meeting. but we're getting out of a damn vehicle and we're taking it. And so then, of course, all the case officers were excited because like, hey, man, the U.S. government's going to buy us a motorcycle.
They're going to buy you a moped.
This is hot shit. I
it's
love
not
it.
going to be that
moped.
cool. You're going to
moped.
It's CIA. You'll get a moped. It'll be an ugly one too.
That's true.
Yeah, no, I think it's it's easy in those circumstances, and you gave the perfect example. If you're going to miss your meeting, you know that's not ideal. You want to fix, so you by yourself. Like, if you don't have a process and you're not disciplined to the process, that's where you're like, let's cut a corner. And
right.
In the business world, cutting a corner might mean that your tax return doesn't get filed on time, or something is late, or an order is late. In your world, it literally was somebody gets shot in the back of the head in an alley, and nobody ever knows what happened to him.
And John, one thing that all of this is incumbent on being very true to the idea of honesty and ethics and integrity. And so, again, because so much of it had to do with us as a CI officer operating alone. And so when you walk into CI headquarters, you walk in, if anyone's been there, on the right is the memorial wall, which has the stars on there. A lot of my friends are on there, and that's a sacred place. And I remember every day walking in, just really being humbled by that. But on the left, it's really interesting. There's a line from the Bible, and it's etched in stone as well in marble, and it says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And that's the idea of staying, so true to the idea of honesty and integrity and ethics. And I say this as a CI officer, and everyone's like, "Merc's full of crap. CI, you lie and cheat and steal." And I'm like, yeah, against foreigners, not against Americans. And when it comes to these processes, again, it's the idea of, hey, I'm going to an agent meeting. If I cut corners on this SDR, no one will know, but I can't.
Yeah, it's interesting because you certainly lived in a world that the truth was a relative thing in a lot of cases, but it strikes me that having a core of integrity among the people you're working with is thus even more important.
100%. And there's two parts of that. There's integrity and honesty with your colleagues, which is critically important. But also, it's the notion, what I said before, and this is the most fun I have in talking to audiences is our relationship with our assets, our agents. Again, this is a Russian, a Chinese, an Iranian, a penetration of Hamas. These are foreigners who are spying for us. But we actually have a moral obligation to keep them safe, to keep them secure. And I tell a story in the book. As I was training, it was a member of an Arab government. He was going back into his country. I was training him on some really sophisticated communication techniques on the streets of Europe. And we're going to go back in. I was going to be his handler. We're going back into a really high counterintelligence threat state. And he took me aside one time and he said, "Hey, I just want to talk to you about something, Mark." He goes, "Training's going great. I have confidence in you." And he said, but you might think about me every once in a while. We're going to meet. Our meeting cycle is once a month. That's how dangerous this counterintelligence environment was. So he said, "You're going to think about me before the meeting, after, so maybe a couple times a month." But he said, "I'm going to think about you every single day, because if you make one mistake, I'm going to get killed. My family, my tribe is going to get killed." So he said, "You have to be perfect." And so I always thought of that, and I try to teach that to officers who work for me, is that, we have not only a moral obligation. Of course, you take your oath going into the agency. I did so on January 3rd, 1993, to the Constitution. And then you have the feelings you have, your oath to your fellow officers. But we also had a real obligation to the agents, these people who agreed to spy for the United States. And again, that's that idea of honesty and integrity. It goes back to the process monkey. I got to run that SDR properly, because I can't let that agent who has really put his life in my hands, I can't let him down or her down.
Yeah. Well, one of the other concepts you talk about is the glue guy. Talk to me about the glue guy.
Yeah, I love this. This is the notion of everyone matters. It's the power of contribution. And in my leadership journey, and I screwed this up so much. And so case officers are the fighter pilots in kind of the intelligence world. And so, or the door kickers, they're the ones who are going in the front door. And so, our job is to handle, spot, assess, develop, recruit, and handle these agents. But there's so many other people behind the scenes at CIA that in the beginning I didn't pay attention to, but in the end, you realize that everybody does matter in a CI station, whether it's a case officer, an analyst, a logistics officer, a support officer. Everybody actually is of equal value. And that's the notion of the glue guy and the glue gal. I always think of a story. This goes back to Afghanistan, where I was chief of Shkin Base, a paramilitary base in Paktika province, and our job was pure. That was the best job I ever had at the agency. You know, it was a fine fix finish mission on a daily basis. You know, I wasn't building wells. I wasn't sitting across from village elders in Afghanistan. You know, some guy picking his toes. Sorry, but I wasn't doing any cultural stuff. This was purely a mission where it was designed for us to put bad guys, Taliban and Al Qaeda on the X and kill them. Calling in airstrikes with our military partners to kill them, and we did it really well. And we were kind of got a lot of attention from it. Officers were really proud. But then something happened one day that again taught me this glue guy or glue gal concept. And it was, I got a call on the radio net that a young Afghan boy was walking outside the base and he stepped on an old landmine from the Soviet times and blew his leg off, and he's bleeding out. Two of my case officers, each of them had kind of a different kind of medical training. One was a former medic in special forces, and the other was a former nurse at a probably a more dangerous job at an emergency room in Baltimore.
Oh.
So I had huge kind of experience with trauma medicine. And they run out there and they're working on this kid, and the kid's family from the village comes by. I get on the radio and I'm trying to call in a medevac, calling a 9 line to get a U.S. military helicopter coming in. Well, it's a little weird. It's certainly not American. It's not a CIA officer. It's not U.S. military. It's not even our Afghan indigenous forces. This is a local kid. And I'm pleading with a base a couple hundred miles away or wherever it was, where they had a medical facility to send a helo, and they finally did. And as our guys, our two officers are working, they're covered in blood. They're working on this kid. They put him on the helicopter, realize he's going to survive, get the family on, takes off. The kid lives after this. And I remember, again, sitting around the fire pit, Caveman TV once again, we're sitting around the fire pit that night. There's no cable on this. I'm not writing this up. We didn't remove from the battlefield a high value target who was going to still was, planning to kill my friends and colleagues, planning attacks on the U.S. military, planning attacks on the homeland. All the things that the base was celebrated for doing. We just saved a young Afghan kid because of two members of our team who did something really kind of unsung and behind the scenes. And that's that notion, again, of the glue guy, that everybody really matters. And I really took that to heart. And then, later on, so what does this mean really kind of in someone's leadership journey? Well, I remember giving this, again, I've given so many kind of crazy talks on this. It was some school administrators in Fairfax County. So what they bring in a former CIA guy to give a leadership talk. It's pretty funny, but this was actually spot on. So I was sitting around with them and I said, all right, so what matters in your school, in the district, Fairfax County? It's a huge school system. Who are your glue guys and glue gals? Well, it's easy for them. They said the IT personnel. So think about that. The school can't run. Computers don't get turned on. And then you can kind of extrapolate how this could go for any unit. And so that's the idea of. Everybody matters. Celebrate everybody in their, celebrate successes with everyone. And then your planning sessions, make sure they're all involved. I remember one of the last jobs I had in the field, I was the acting station chief at 400-person station. It's a huge station for CIA. In the past, my morning meeting would be all case officers, tip of the spear, guys and gals. At the end of my career, it was the chief of finance. Why is that? You can't run CIA operations without money. It's the chief of logistics, the chief of support, chief of security. I mean, the entire team is there, and that's kind of the message on the notion of the glue guy and the glue gal. And if you're a sports fan, you hear about this all the time. These are the kind of the unsung heroes on a baseball team or a football team. It's the backup catcher. One of it. Where I live in Vienna, Virginia. We just had you're out in California now. Last year, our top pitcher, 6'8" guy, 6'9", kid named Bryce Eldridge, got drafted in the first round by the San Francisco Giants. He's going to be playing pro by you. Throws 97 miles an hour. And when I went and talked to the team, I asked them, I asked the team, who are the glue guys? Well, there was a third string catcher who caught every one of his bullpens, never saw the field the entire varsity year. And Bryce gets up and he says, that's our glue guy. That's my glue guy. I'm all state. By the way, he just got a $4 million signing bonus. Maybe he should have given some of that money to that 17-year-old kid who's catching for him. But third string catcher matters to that team just as much as anyone else.
Yeah, which I think then ties hand in hand with another concept you talk about, which is being a people developer, right? If you recognize the value throughout the organization of people and the value that everybody adds, you then also recognize that developing people is really what leadership is about.
I agree completely. And, I kind of think, or I always ask people when I do these talks, how do you want to be remembered? Simple as that. What's your legacy? And, all of us in my old world have what in our basement, and John, you're invited to come over. We'll have a scotch. You can see the I love me wall. We all got them. So I got plaques. I got pictures with kings and queens, all sorts of fancy medals. I mean, I had a career with a lot of failure, but with some significant success too. But nobody gives a shit about that. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
So what do they care about? And my last job, I had 2,000 officers working for me, but they care about how I developed them as leaders. They care about how I treated them. And so, it's not operations I'll be remembered for. It's how I was developing my personal. It's what I call passing the torch. And, there was what I used to do in Afghanistan, I did in Iraq and some other places. So let's say I was in charge of a unit and I had to leave for a couple of days. Maybe I had to fly to Kabul to see the head shed or something. And so, what I would do is if I had 5 or 6 people, and they might have been, leaders on their own in the unit, but I would say, hey, you're in charge of the base right now for the next 48 hours. And I would make sure in the time frame over a couple months, I would allow each of them to have that kind of leadership experience. With 48 hours running a paramilitary base, the boss is gone. But this is it. This is their training program, and it's a real live training program. I remember jumping on a helo one time, and one of the officers was looking at me and he said, hey boss, I'll hold down the fort when you're gone. And this is what I'm going to say now is I'm not advocating. I grabbed him by his shirt and got in his face. You can't do that anymore. But I grabbed him by his shirt and I said, what are you talking about? I said, in much more, explicit language, I said, you make every decision here. If we're taking incoming, you return fire. If there's a big agent meeting I don't know about, you guys go through with it. I said, we'll go over your decision-making when we get back, as kind of a teaching point, but hey, this base is yours. And I tell this story because when he had these kind of bugged out eyes and they all did fine. But when my book came out, and we did a little book event in Vienna at a one of these great indie bookstores, and this case officer who now is a station chief, multiple time station chief overseas, came, and I didn't even talk to him that day. He talked to my son. And he said, "Hey, your dad was the best boss I ever had." And my son said, "Why?" Curious, because I'm his dad, so he really can't think of anything I do.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're his dad, so you're an idiot.
Yeah. And he told this story. He said, because your dad gave me these opportunities, to develop. And so, I love that stuff. You have to have that note. And by the way, so I was so proud of that. So, screw all my medals and all the crap I have in my basement. Like, holy cow, there's a guy who's a current station chief who's actually thinking back to a time, a decade ago where I helped him out and helped him to become a leader. And that was so gratifying to me. And so it's just the idea of, as a leader, your job is to pass the torch.
Yeah.
There's the next generation out there, and how you develop, people. That's how you're going to be remembered, not about your individual exploits. And this is out of all these concepts, I believe in this so strongly because it really matters.
No, I think you're spot on. It is easy to want to be the leader and to be in charge. And it takes you a long time to realize that the best thing you can do as leader is diversify power and just get out of the way.
That's right.
Which is, it's kind of counterintuitive though, isn't it?
But you learn that over time too. Again, when I was, again, my first leadership job in 2003, good Lord, I was a mess. I was a disaster. I thought I had to do everything myself. I thought I was smarter than everybody else. My last leadership job in 17 to 19, where I had 2,000 people working for me, it was all about delegating down and trusting your subordinates. And there's and realizing that it's good if most of the people around you are smarter than you. Your ego is gone at that point because it has to be.
Yeah.
And so again, that's part of the leadership journey. And it's, by the way, this is okay. Like one of the things that I think, people who do have a lot of folks under their command or are managing a first-time leader is to understand that first-time leader is going to go through some struggles, and kind of walking, him or her through that is really important.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. One of my favorite Steve Jobs quotes is, "We don't hire smart people so we can tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they'll tell us what to do."
Right, 100%.
So, Mark, where can people find you and your work? I mean, obviously, everybody needs to read the book, which is a fantastic book. But what's the best way for people to follow you?
Sure. So the book kind of turned into, it's not an active website, but it's a website, markpolymeropoulos.com, pretty easy, in which some of my kind of the opportunities for speaking engagements is there. And, again, as I do talks on leadership, I'll do talks on geopolitics. I've done some great stuff. Again, I'm a huge baseball fan, so the world of athletics is really important to me. So anyway, I can get booked for speaking engagements anytime. I have I regret to even say this, but I'm on Twitter at @mpolymer, and this is just a kind of this is me. Not unhinged is the wrong word, but unfiltered is better. Or as my friends say, you're a dart with no feather in the back. And so, I'll talk about what I ate that day. What my lifting routine was. I'm an idiot, so I put up. I benched 350 the other day. I'm 54 years old. I was pretty proud of it. And so I videotaped myself doing that, which I got mocked mercilessly for.
Oh yeah,
rightfully so. And then and I talk a lot about kind of current events too. But it's one of the things about me that's interesting is that I'm kind of a classic centrist in terms of my politics, and so so everyone's always mad at me for something. The right's pissed at me half the time, the left is pissed at me half the time, and I don't care.
That's about right.
That's probably the best place for it to be. And one other point of this too is that I am certainly, so again, markpolymeropoulos.com, but people write me emails all the time. I spent a ton of time going around to colleges talking about the intelligence community. We talk about public service. Hey, you don't have to join the CIA, join the FBI, go become a cop, a firefighter, anything. Serve something greater than yourself, and that's your country. But I am accessible, and I probably have 4 or 5 young professionals / college students throughout the week who I'm kind of mentoring and talking to about jumping into that realm of national security. And so, as my wife says, you are the world's worst businessman because I just seem to do everything for free.
Yeah. Believe
and
me,
answer a lot of questions.
Yeah, as a business guy, the stuff that I really love is the stuff that I don't get paid for.
Yep. No, I mean, I go back and forth to the Philly Police Department. I do a lot of work with them, and that's all. Could just that's without any compensation, I don't care, because it's the law enforcement to me is very much like CIA. It's an indispensable institution that often is not, certainly is not appreciated. You don't join these organizations, you don't become a CIA officer or a cop or an FBI agent or whoever for a pat in the head. You got to have that kind of inner strength to do a really tough job. And so I love going to see the Philly Police Department. It's weird because I'm from New Jersey. I mean, I grew up a New York Giants fan. I spent all these time with these Eagles fans. But it's
see, the tribes can get along.
They can. No, but this is again super rewarding. I took my son to a game at Citizens Park in Philly. We were walking around, and there's a couple of guys and their families came up to me and said, "Hey, you're that CIA guy who helps us." And I said, "Who are you?" He said, "We're cops from Philly. We've heard your talks." That was awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So we finish every episode of Battle Proven Leadership with what I call the 3 questions. So these are short answer, off the top of your head. What do you think? How do you feel? Kind of questions. And the goal of this is to kind of leave people with thinking about how to be a better leader. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, what's your most important habit?
Sleep. I mean that seriously. Take care of yourself. It's, maybe sleeping and working out, lifting. 100%. You got, you're never going to be the best leader, best person, best man or woman you can be if you're not taking care of yourself. And sleep, and it's proven, John, you know this, I'm sure, is that sleep is absolutely essential for high performance athletes, operators, cops, law enforcement, anyone.
Everybody. I agree completely. I am maniacal about my sleep.
Yep.
Number 2, what's the most important thing for building an effective team?
Listening. A great boss of mine used to say that, if you're talking, you ain't listening. It's the idea of just listen. And again, as a leader, especially junior leaders, you're always talking, you're always giving your opinion. More senior leaders, more seasoned ones, take input, listen to your people.
What do you think the one thing every leader needs to know is?
Drop your ego and surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. And again, that's tough. That's counterintuitive at the beginning when you're that hotshot. once you get it, you realize surround yourself with people who are better than you, then the team takes off.
I love that. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with me, and we'll put all the information in the show notes so people can get in touch with you. And, again, man, thank you for living in the shadows for the majority of your adult life, taking care of us.
Thanks, John. It was great.
Take care,
Appreciate it.